What if the reason people listen to you is because they're afraid not to? Not because they love you, not because they understand you, but because at some primitive, unspoken level, they fear what might happen if they don't. Not necessarily violence, not always punishment, but consequence. Loss, rejection, silence, power. In a world where kindness is applauded but dominance is obeyed, what does it mean to be respected? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Some of the most respected figures in history didn't earn it through compassion. They didn't earn it by being liked. They earned it by being necessary and terrifying. They understood something most people would rather not admit. That fear, carefully wielded, is a more dependable currency than love. Niccolò Machiavelli once said, "It is much safer to be feared than loved, if one must choose." That sentence, stripped of its diplomatic context, sounds cold, almost sociopathic. But what if it's not a strategy, but a mirror? What if it reflects not just political cunning, but something buried deep in our psychology? A primal wiring that governs how we follow, who we trust, and why we yield. Think about it. As a child, did you ever disobey the teacher you liked, but never dared to cross the one who scared you? At work, do people comply because they re-inspired or because they recalculating the fallout of saying no? Even in relationships, is it love that keeps the fragile balance or fear of being alone, unwanted, abandoned? So let's push past the surface. Not just the Machiavellian stereotype of manipulation, but the deeper question underneath. Why do we respect people who make us feel small? Why do we mistake control for competence, silence for strength, and intimidation for intelligence? This is not about advocating cruelty. It's not a blueprint for tyranny. This is about tracing the psychological veins of power, about exposing the eerie comfort we feel when someone else holds the sword. It's about the subconscious contract we sign with fear every time we choose safety over authenticity, hierarchy over harmony. For centuries, philosophers, rulers, and theologians have debated the nature of influence. Plato believed in the rule of the philosopher-king wisdom as power. Nietzsche challenged that with his will to power, warning that man's deepest drive is not truth or goodness but dominance. Freud peeled back the layers and found our childhood traumas scripting our adult deference to authority. And Jung? Jung told us that what we repress, our shadow, is often where our real strength hides. And yet you still want to be liked, don't you? You want to be seen, understood, embraced. But the moment you try too hard, something in you wilts. The more you chase approval, the more it escapes you. Why? Because respect and love don't live in the same house. They rarely even visit each other. One is built on emotional resonance, the other on psychological gravity. One asks to be let in, the other commands the door to open. So ask yourself, when people listen to you, is it out of admiration or consequence? When you speak, do they hear your words or feel your weight? This isn't about becoming a tyrant. It's about waking up. It's about understanding the physics of human dynamics before they manipulate you from the shadows. It's about confronting a paradox at the heart of who we are, that sometimes the fastest way to respect is fear. Let's go deeper. Let's peel the mask off respect and examine its true anatomy, how fear shapes loyalty, why power intoxicates, and what Machiavelli may have understood better than most, that fear, unlike love, doesn't falter when tested. Ready to look into the shadow? To understand why fear earns respect, you must first untangle a brutal truth. Most people don't want freedom. They want certainty. And fear, far from being a weakness, is the tool that carves certainty into chaos. It simplifies. It clarifies. It directs. That's its power. Machiavelli didn't glorify fear for its cruelty. He recognized its psychological efficiency. Fear doesn't require explanation, it demands obedience. It's not concerned with being fair, only being effective. And in a world obsessed with influence, the most effective force often wins. Respect, as we typically define it, is a fragile thing. It floats on the winds of opinion, shaped by social cues, diluted by time. But fear is elemental. It sticks. It cuts deeper than admiration. Where love is a tapestry woven with threads of trust, memory, and vulnerability, fear is a single, unbreakable chain. It doesn't ask for your loyalty, it takes it. Why? Because fear bypasses the rational mind. It drills straight into the reptilian brain where fight-or-flight responses live. You don't negotiate with fear. You submit to it, or you flee from it. And when that fear is directed not at immediate physical danger, but at a person, someone who carries consequence like a second skin, it transforms into deference, caution, and eventually, respect. You might say, but isn't respect supposed to be earned through integrity, consistency, compassion? Yes, that's the ideal. But the psyche doesn't operate on ideals, it operates on instincts, and this is where things turn dark. Let's bring in Carl Jung. He taught us that every human being carries a shadow, the disowned, often despised parts of the self we push into the unconscious. Our aggression, our lust for control, our hunger for recognition. When we repress the shadow, we don't eliminate it. We project it onto others, onto leaders, onto those who seem powerful. And strangely, we begin to respect the very qualities we pretend to hate because they represent the suppressed forces within us that we are too afraid to integrate. The harsh boss, the strict father, the dominant friend. You've likely met someone like that, someone you wouldn't call kind, but who leaves an imprint. Someone you don't necessarily like, but you don't cross. And a part of you unconsciously respects them more than the agreeable ones. Why? Because they stand in their shadow without apology. They embody what you've been taught to suppress. They have agency, weight, presence. There's a name for this paradox, the gravity of the predator. Not predator in a violent sense, but as a symbol of presence that commands a room without needing to raise its voice. A lion doesn't need to roar to remind the gazelle of its place. It simply is. The respect it receives is not earned through kindness, it's offered through fear, dressed as reverence. Now ask yourself, have you ever felt this shift in your own behavior? Have you ever spoken differently around someone who intimidated you? Chosen your words with extra precision? Watched your posture, your tone, your silence not because you respected them intellectually, but because something deeper warned you. Be careful. That's not respect in the moral sense. That's survival wrapped in the illusion of respect. And it works. In politics, in business, in relationships, it works. Even in modern society, we're still running tribal software. And tribes didn't survive through mutual appreciation. They followed the one who could protect them or destroy them. The one who walked closest to the fire without flinching. The one whose voice meant something not because of what was said, but because of what might happen if it was ignored. Erich Fromm, the great psychoanalyst, called this tendency escape from freedom. When confronted with the full weight of personal responsibility, people unconsciously seek figures who seem to possess certainty, direction, command. And fear, strategic, not sadistic fear, becomes a kind of anchor, a lighthouse in the storm. So here's the dilemma. To be respected, do you need to be feared? Not always. But if you lack consequence, if your words carry no cost, then your influence is optional. And optional influence is often ignored. This is the dark lesson Machiavelli whispered through the centuries. That power is not inherently moral, it is magnetic. And fear, when balanced and restrained, doesn't destroy your influence, it cements it. The question is no longer whether fear earns respect. It's whether you are willing to embody enough gravity to carry consequence without losing your humanity. And that takes us somewhere far more personal. Imagine waking up in a life that feels like it belongs to someone else. You walk through your days checking boxes, wearing masks, keeping peace. You avoid conflict. You say the right things. You accommodate others. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, your presence begins to disappear. People like you. They compliment your kindness, your patience. They call you easy to work with, nice, supportive. But when decisions are made, when lines are drawn, when voices rise, you're not the one they look to. You're not the one they listen to. Because somewhere along the way, you traded power for peace. You gave up consequence for comfort. And the world, brutally honest in the way it reflects our inner state, responded accordingly. You see, people don't respect softness without strength behind it. They don't respect availability that comes without discernment. They don't respect kindness when it feels like fear in disguise. This is the heartbreak of the agreeable soul. You want connection, you crave closeness, but what you sacrifice unintentionally is edge, and without edge your presence becomes optional. And you feel it, don't you? The silent ache of being overlooked, the bitterness that seeps in when others rise while you remain unseen. It's not that you want to dominate, you just don't want to disappear. So what do? Most people go one of two ways. They double down on people-pleasing, hoping that eventually their loyalty will be rewarded, or they snap. They break under the weight of repression and unleash their shadow in chaotic, destructive ways. But there's another path, one that few take, because it demands you become something most people are terrified of. A boundary, not a wall, not a weapon, a boundary. An energetic presence that says, I am not to be used. I am not to be dismissed. I am not to be manipulated. It's not loud, it's not cruel, but it's final. And that's what people respect. The sense that you carry a line inside you that cannot be crossed, not out of aggression, but out of self-ownership. That is where fear becomes sacred. Not the fear of harm, but the fear of loss. The fear of losing access to something powerful, something rare. This is where Machiavelli meets Jung. Because to carry this presence, you must integrate your shadow. You must face the parts of you that have teeth, the part that gets angry, the part that knows how to say no, the part that doesn't need approval to feel real, the part you were taught to hide in childhood lest it scare someone away. But that part, that's your spine, that's your center, and it's only when you reunite with it that your energy shifts from pleasing to commanding, from accessible to invaluable. Here's the paradox. People don't respect you because you're always available. They respect you because you could walk away. They don't respect you because you're always kind. They respect you because your kindness is a choice, not a compulsion. They don't respect you because you say yes. They respect you because your yes means something, because you've been proven you know how to say no. This is where fear becomes transformational. When others know that disappointing you has consequence, not punishment, but distance. That disrespect results in disconnection, that your presence is not guaranteed, that your affection is not for sale. And this applies to love, to work, to friendship. A lover who fears losing your intimacy because they've tasted its depth, that's respect. A colleague who fears disappointing you because they've seen your standard, that's respect. A friend who hesitates before taking you for granted, that's respect. Not terror, not domination, but a subtle gravity, a knowing, a sense that you are not to be mishandled. Søren Kierkegaard once wrote, "Anxiety is the dizziness of freedom, but freedom without fear is often freedom without depth." Fear grounds us. Fear alerts us to what matters. And when it's healthy, it teaches others to value us not through control, but through clarity. So now ask yourself, are you respected or just liked? And more importantly, do you fear being feared? Because the version of you who steps fully into their own power, the one who isn't afraid to carry consequence, to evoke discomfort, to walk alone if needed, that version of you is the one people remember, the one they think about when you leave the room, the one they don't interrupt, the one they never quite feel safe disappointing. Not because you are cruel, but because you finally remembered what you're worth. So where does all of this leave you? In a world that worships likability but quietly obeys gravity, what role will you play? Will you keep softening your voice so others won't flinch, shrinking your edges so no one feels threatened, offering love with no cost, hoping one day it will be returned with respect? Or will you choose the harder path, the path where love is real because it's not required, where kindness is powerful because it comes with limits, where your presence is felt not because it's loud, but because it's rooted, dense, unmovable? Here's the truth that lingers in the shadow of Machiavelli, this infamous insight. Fear doesn't destroy respect, it protects it. Not when used to manipulate, but when used to guard the sacred. Fear is not the enemy. Misuse is. Overuse is. But the presence of fear in a relationship, in a space, in a self, is often the signal that something matters, that something is at stake. Think about the people you truly respect. Not the ones you idolize from a distance, but the ones whose eyes made you hesitate before lying, whose silence made you nervous when you crossed a line, whose presence made you straighten your posture without even knowing why. Were they cruel? Probably not. But were they soft? Unlikely. They carried something, a weight, a code, a sense of center. They didn't threaten you, they reminded you of your own conscience, of the unspoken laws between souls, of your longing to be better. That's the kind of fear that elevates, not diminishes, the kind that earns real respect. This isn't about becoming untouchable. It's not about faking dominance or barking orders. That's theater. That's insecurity in costume. True power doesn't need performance. It radiates through coherence when who you are, what you believe, and what you're willing to enforce are all in alignment, and you feel it when someone has it. They walk into a room and they don't chase attention, they redirect gravity. They speak and the room gets quieter, not because they demand silence, but because their words carry weight. Not noise, not charm, but something undeniable. You don't need to dominate people to command respect, but you do need to be someone they're afraid to lose. And not because you threaten them, because you don't need them, because you've stopped selling yourself at a discount, because you've remembered what it means to hold a boundary with love in your chest and fire in your spine. That's what most people are missing. They chase approval, they chase applause. But what they're really starving for is gravity, that sense of being deeply rooted in their own value. And once you find that, once you integrate your shadow and stop apologizing for your intensity, something strange begins to happen. People listen. Not because you ask them to, but because the alternative is forgetting what it feels like to be in the presence of someone who doesn't flinch. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And who you truly are is not afraid to be feared if that fear is the echo of your integrity. So no, you don't have to be cruel to be respected. But you do have to be clear. Clear in your no. Clear in your yes. Clear in the way you hold yourself like something sacred. And when you do, you'll find something unexpected. That the respect you gain isn't brittle. It doesn't vanish when you falter. It holds. Because it was never based on performance, it was based on presence. So the next time you feel that flicker of discomfort when someone fears disappointing you, don't run from it. Examine it. Hold it. Ask, is this fear born of domination, or of devotion, of force, or of standard? And if it's the latter, let it be. Let it sharpen you. Let it anchor you. Let it remind you that respect isn't granted to those who are nice, it is magnetized to those who have become something others cannot ignore. So the question isn't, are you respected? The real question is, have you become someone they'd never dare to forget? If this stirred something in you, if you're drawn to ideas that challenge, unsettle, and awaken, like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.